Our hope is that as folks join us throughout the month, they'll be able to view this recording to kind of get all the details for the volunteer opportunity. And with that, I just wanted to start off with welcoming everyone. My name is Nadia. I'm a part of our volunteer engagement team at the United Way of King County. And part of my role is to support with the Emerging Leaders 365 volunteerism program. And this year we are focusing all of our efforts virtually with these month-long challenges. And I am going to start off by kind of doing a little bit of a agenda overview for what to expect for this evening. And looks like folks should be able to see the PowerPoint. And so at United Way, together, we're building a community where people have homes, students graduate, and families are financially stable. So as we look at these different opportunities to come together as an Emerging Leader 365 community, we'll really be focusing on those three different community impact areas and working together collectively to drive impact. So for our agenda this evening, we'll kind of start off with an icebreaker to see who's in the room. I'll do an overview of United Way of King County and the Emerging Leader 365 program. And then I'll pass the mic off to Michaela, who is our expert on census and will give us some background information, really talking about why this effort is really critical to us being able to achieve our mission and drive that community change that we want to see. And then we'll go from there to kind of just do an overview of where you come in, how you can support us as volunteers. And then Drew will kind of wrap up the evening with ways to stay connected. Okay, so a couple of things for the Zoom etiquette, I guess you could say. Please feel free to always use the chat box. There are also reactions that you are welcome to use if we're talking too quickly or need to slow down, or if you need to raise your hand for a question or a comment. But then also, again, feel free to type in text as well. So for our icebreaker tonight, we'll just ask that you unmute and share your name, your pronouns, where you're calling in from, or what you consider your neighborhood or community. And then we'll just do like plans for the long weekend. So I'll start us off again. So my name's Nadia, pronouns are she, her, and I am in Green Lake, Finney Ridge area right now. And my plans for the weekend are just to relax and enjoy some time outside since I can't believe it's already September. But with that, I'll pass it off to Michaela.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela. My pronouns are she, her. I'm calling in today from Capitol Hill. And my plans for the long weekend, I'm not actually sure yet. I'm hoping to do some backpacking, but I'm also off next week and backpacking then. So maybe doing 2 trips in a row is a little bit much, but it's so beautiful. So we'll see. And I'll just pass it off to Cassandra, who's just next on my view.
Hi, my name is Cassandra. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm calling in from Lower Queen Anne right now. My long weekend is far less exciting, I think, than anyone else's. I have to get my car serviced, and I will be cleaning my carpet with a professional carpet cleaner because I don't know, spring cleaning hit in fall for me. But I'm looking forward to relaxing on the Monday off. And the next person on my list is Drew.
Cool, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. My name's Drew. I use he, him, his pronouns. I live in Magnolia. I used to live in Capitol Hill. We moved a little while ago and I miss Capitol Hill a lot, actually. And yeah, my plans are also a little boring. I'm going to relax and hopefully get to like steam clean all of our couches and furniture. It's something I've been putting off for like since the spring, basically. So finally got that done. And I will pass it to Christina.
Hi guys, I'm Christina. Pronouns are she, her. And my plans for the weekend are to figure out my school schedule for this fall. And that's kind of it. Maybe babysit my niece and nephew.
Cool. And welcome, Ryan. We're just doing an icebreaker. So if you just want to kind of walk through the prompts on the slide, yeah.
Sure, yeah, it took me a while to find the link, so I'm glad I found it. My name is Ryan Finney. Pronouns are he, him. I am in Edmonds. And my plans for the long weekend is going to be recovering from this week, and I'm still trying to get a tea time for a round of golf.
Well, welcome, Ryan and everyone. I'm really excited to have you joining us tonight. And so from there, we're kind of just going to go into a quick overview, as I mentioned earlier. So with the community impact areas I kind of outlined at the beginning of the presentation, United Way's work is really focused when we think about education. It's looking at early learning and supporting youth in being able to attain GED or high school completion. And when we think about families being financially stable, that's really being able to provide families with wraparound services for a more holistic supportive system, which could include getting access to food or perhaps extra income through our tax campaign, etc. And in our ending homelessness work, really being focused around getting folks into housing, stable housing, and also job opportunities so they have that financial income stability. And then through all of our areas of work, we really try to think at a systemic level and what ways in which we can support legislation or policy that really helps us create this healthy community, again, that's supportive. And then also looking at how we can approach our work with a racial equity lens and really being mindful about the intersection of race and racism and how we keep that at the forefront of our minds when we're coming up with these strategies to really drive impact. And then where you all come in as Emerging Leaders 365 is through these month-long volunteer challenges. And the idea is that we can gather collectively as a community to rally around a cause and be able to, even though we're in this virtual environment, still work together towards this collective goal. And really learning from experts at United Way on why this cause is critical for us to create that healthy community and then ways in which we can support in being able to achieve that. So with that, I will hand things over to Michaela, who's going to talk to us about the census and what we can do to support with that process.
Cool. Let me get my PowerPoint going here and we will get started. All right. Awesome. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so again, thank you all so much for being here. Actually, I'm going to try to share this a different way. So bear with me for 1 second. Oops. Nope, we're doing it the other way. All right. All right, so I am super pumped to be able to talk to you all tonight. I have been living and breathing the census for about a year now, and I know there's maybe a lot more exciting ways for you all to be spending the sunny Seattle than talking about a 10-question survey, but I think this 10-question survey is super interesting and really important, so I'm really excited to get to talk about it with you all today. So again, my name is Michaela. My pronouns are she, hers. I am the Census Program Manager for United Way of King County and have been part of the work that United Way has been doing has been as a leading partner of the We Count Washington campaign. So we're helping to lead statewide coalitions to make sure that this count happens as accurately and completely and fairly as possible. So tonight I'm going to talk through what the census is, why it matters, what the current census operations that are underway, some of the barriers and disruptions that have happened, what's like the current state of the census, and then we'll talk about some moving forward steps. And if at any point you have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I might not notice, but Nadia and Drew can shout that out for me. But also feel free to just unmute and ask questions. I get bored of my own voice and would love to hear from other folks also. So before we get started, I'm curious if people can tell me if they have done the census or not this year. Does anybody remember doing it, or have you specifically not done it? Give me a raise of the hands if you have done it. Cassandra gives me a thumbs up. I love it. Ryan did the census. Yes. Nadia, Drew. Yes. All right. Well, you all are experts then. That's great. Can anybody tell me why you did it?
I remember in high school history class learning how important it was and how it dictates funding and representation. And actually, I lied. It wasn't high school history class. It was the political science degree I have that drugged this into my head about how the census allocates basically how our government functions and how we're represented in each small part, because we limited the amount of people in Congress. And so now we have to reallocate them based upon population. And I will stop rambling.
Exactly, you're spot on. And Lacey says in the chat, it's your civic duty, like voting. And I could not agree more. That is exactly it. So we'll talk a little bit about what the census is. And as an overview, the census is in the Constitution. It has been happening since 1790. It's from Article 1, Section 2. Here's the actual language if you are like me and love reading legal documents like that. It happens every 10 years. It's a count of every person in the US. And every person is really actually important. It's not every citizen. It's not some people. It is literally every person. It is, again, constitutionally mandated and hugely important for state representation and federal funding. The purpose of the decennial census, it's all about what we call the 3 Ds: democracy, data, and dollars. So like Cassandra said, it's for political representation. It's how we reallocate the House of Representatives. There's 435 total, and that breakdown happens based on population, which comes from the census. It also dictates how many electoral college votes each state has. And then locally, it also supports the redrawing of legislative and electoral districts. So in 2021, there will be redistricting across the country that happens, and that is all based on census data. And of course, it informs the allocation of 880 billion, although I've seen numbers in the trillions recently of that federal funding, and that's per year. So that's for 10 years, but we're getting 880 billion per year for 10 years. So it's a ton of money. It's basically the building block for our entire democracy. And even my last job, I was working in immigrant human rights. And so anytime that we were writing a grant or trying to do anything to get more funding, we always do census data. The business community uses census data to determine where to open new chains, where a business might be viable or not. Like, it truly is the data that informs everything that happens in our country. And then gets down to really basic levels, like how many teachers we have, what we have for affordable housing, whether we have the resources we need to prepare for earthquakes or wildfires, how our roads get fixed. And we're seeing all of this, especially right now. Like, we are undergoing crises in this country and we need to recover and respond. And it is the census data that will help us do that. So it's super, super important. So I'm really glad that you all have already done it. So I'm going to talk now about some of the operations that happen with the census, because the census, really, for it to happen, it's a collection of different operations that happen to count people living in different circumstances. So the goal is to count everybody once and to count them in the right place. And the Census Bureau cares about households, not necessarily individuals, although individuals are counted. but they're trying to capture what a household in the US looks like. And then in 2020, the census has been pretty different for a bunch of reasons that we'll talk about coming up, the least of which is COVID. But 2020 was the first time that the census was online. In the past, it had only been paper or on the phone. This year, they decided to try an online version. And then given the disruption of COVID, that is a really great thing that happened. A bummer about what's different in 2020 is that there has been a severe lack of census funding for on-the-ground questionnaire assistance or any like real community outreach. But we're fortunate that Washington State actually allocated $15 million for census work, part of which is funding the work that United Way is doing. So Washington has stepped up to sort of fill that gap, but it's a problem across the country. So for most people, about 95% of the US population and anybody with a traditional city-style mailing address receives an invitation in the mail to complete the census. Those started being mailed out in March. I know I filled out my census in March, which feels like a lifetime ago. But for most of those people, there are 3 ways to do the census, and that is online, the paper form, or over the phone. And those people who have not yet responded are now are being visited by door knockers or Census Bureau enumerators. And that's part of what we call the non-response follow-up or NARFU operation. And that's, I think, the picture a lot of people have of the census is the people with like the Census Bureau bags that go door to door and knock on people's doors to get their data. And that is happening right now. But the data is the best and it's the cheapest when people self-respond. Sometimes the door knockers, if they visit a household multiple times and nobody answers, they can actually ask the landlord or a neighbor for info on who's living there. And there's just some like data translation stuff that can be weird with an enumerator at the door. So we're really trying to get people to self-respond so that they can identify for themselves how they want their household to be reflected. And then there is also a few different operations for how to count people who are not in those like traditional city style households. So a few of those are listed here. There are a bunch more, but these are the primary ones that at least we're dealing with in this region. So we've got group quarters enumeration, which is for nursing homes, jails, college dorms, et cetera. And in those scenarios, the administrator of that facility can actually just send all of the data over to the Bureau with who their residents are, which is super convenient during COVID times. It doesn't actually need any in-person counting. Service-based enumeration is specifically for people experiencing homelessness or any of our unsheltered neighbors. And in that count, the Bureau goes to service providers like shelters, soup kitchens, hygiene centers, any outdoor locations, and counts the people who are being served at that location that day. And there's also a point in time-esque count where they canvass an area overnight and just count how many people are sleeping outside. It's not great data because they don't wake them up and talk to them, which is good. So those people are at least counted as existing, but the data is not very complete. And in our region, this is a huge deal. And we're super worried about this count this year. So we're doing a lot of work around this service-based enumeration piece. So if any of you are working with people experiencing homelessness, or you know people who are, or you yourself are unsheltered, I would love to connect and talk more about this count because it's super important and I'm not sure it's going to go super well because of COVID. And then there's the transitory locations, which are people who are living in hotels, motels, RV parks, campgrounds, anyone who doesn't have what they call a usual home elsewhere. So those are some of the operations. So we've got, the mailing of the invitation to complete, door knocking, and then these different operations. And together, the hope is that this will give the Bureau really good data on everyone in the US, where they're living and what their circumstances are like. Going to talk now about barriers and disruptions. This census has been very different than what we were expecting it to be. And there's been a lot of challenges that have come up. But we here in Washington, we're strong, we're powering through them. But it's been a difficult year in terms of the census. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of the census because the census has and in some ways still is being used as a tool of white supremacy. And there's a lot of things that I think we can be doing to fight back against this. But some of the history here, like, racial categories have changed wildly over the years, often to consolidate financial and political power for white citizens. It's often white people who are deciding what those racial categories should look like. And when our country was first being founded, they would see like what immigrants were coming in and decide whether or not to count those people, or how to count them. And race was determined by the census taker until 1880. Like, a census taker would go to someone's door, knock on it, look at them when they answered it, and decide their race for them, which leads to just all kinds of problems with how our country was set up and the data that was used to set our country up and how we're still dealing with that today. And then a few other examples of just how this data has been and is still being weaponized. There's the one drop rule. The Census Bureau decided to create these terms like quadroon and octoroon, where if you had even one drop of Black blood in your body, you were counted as a Black person. And they were doing that to like mess with the data and try to like study Black people in some pretty unfair ways. The 3/5 compromise also came out of the census, and that counted every 5 enslaved people only counted as 3 full humans as a way to consolidate power. Native communities weren't fully counted until 1900, which means that for the first 110 years of the census, we weren't even counting the people who were here first. And census data was used to incarcerate Japanese Americans during World War II, which is super problematic. And then today still, as an example, incarcerated people are counted where the prison is located, not in their hometown. So often in these times of mass incarceration, these prisons are located out in rural areas. And so you have a lot of Black and brown people who aren't from those communities, but those communities are getting, they're being counted there. So like a super rural area that is really conservative might all of a sudden look like there's a ton of Black and brown people and way more citizens that need resources. And that's taking resources away from the communities that incarcerated folks came from. There's also limited options for gender and sex and complex living situations, which doesn't let people like fully express themselves and how they identify. So there's a lot of things we need to do to change the census. And while it can be super problematic, and it has been super problematic, it did become more scientific and less political in the post-World War II era. I want to be clear about that. And there are some really strong confidentiality protections now post-World War II, especially because of that Japanese Americans piece. We'll talk about that later, but I think that framing is just really important, that this survey, while important and the building block of our democracy, it isn't always the most equitable. So often with the census, we talk about historically undercounted communities, but those are communities that are not only historically, they are presently undercounted. And it's essentially anybody who is not white or educated or wealthy or living in a really stable housing environment. So like young people are often more mobile, they are often renters, so that is harder to reach them. Racial and ethnic minorities, Native American communities, immigrants, refugees, people who just distrust the government, which can be people who are rural, people who are in cities. There's a lot of valid reasons for that. But these are the people that we have been working so hard to try to engage in the census, because it is so important for them to say like, no, I'm here and I count, and we're going to make sure that our voices are heard and we get the representation that we deserve. So a few of the issues that have come up specifically in 2020 with the census has been some really intentional immigrant suppression. And this started years ago when the Trump administration tried to add a citizenship question to the census. That question did not get added. It was shot down in court, but it has still created enough fear that a lot of immigrants don't want to do it, because there was so much press around the threat of the question and not enough press when it didn't actually get included. To make it worse, there was a presidential memo on July 21st that said that they wanted to exclude non-citizens from the apportionment totals, which means that they want to exclude non-citizens from the count that would inform how our political representation is allocated. So for the Electoral College, for the House of Representatives, and for legislative districts. that is currently being challenged in court. There are a lot of lawsuits about it. It seems pretty clearly unconstitutional and even logistically impossible because we're not asking about citizenship. So I don't know how they think that they can separate out those responses, but the harm is in the headline and the harm is in the suppression and the fear that it causes. So it has been a huge issue. There is also the shortened timeline, which has potentially been one of the most disruptive. And this is due to COVID and also due to some really poor political decisions. But in April of 2020, the Census Bureau asked Congress for an extension to submit their data to the president and to Congress and to the states. So the data is supposed to be turned in on December 31st, 2020. Bureau asked for an extension to the end of April so that they could extend the self-response period because they had to pause their operations due to COVID outbreaks. And that would have allowed the self-response period or for the whole census really to be open for people to respond to until the end of October instead of July 31st. And then in late July, Congress and the White House decided that they were actually not going to extend that deadline and that they wanted to have the data by December 31st, which meant the Census Bureau is now scrambling and they are trying to get this count done by the end of September now. It's hugely problematic. It's leading to a pretty inaccurate count, we think. And we only have 4 weeks left. So the census closes 4 weeks from today. So this month is really an all hands on deck month. And then within the Bureau itself, it is deeply underfunded. It is deeply understaffed. The door knocking operation requires 500,000 people. It's the largest peacetime mobilization that happens in the country. And as of August 15th, the Bureau only had 288,000 of those door knockers. So we have a shortened timeline, we don't have enough door knockers, and there isn't funding for community outreach. It's been a little problematic. And then there's a lot of tension too between career Census Bureau officials and the scientists and the statisticians and political appointees and some other some just lack of trust in the intentions and how the data will be used. And again, because of the funding, there's a huge reliance on community partners to do the work that the Bureau should be doing. And that's what's happening in Washington. So there are a lot of inherent and systemic issues with the census. And we need people to do it anyways. The only way that we can make this better is for all of us to be like, this isn't right, and we're making sure that we're counted so that the data shows what our country really looks like, not the way that they want the country to look. And I also want to stress that the census has the strongest confidentiality laws on record, and that no census data can be shared with any law enforcement, with landlords, with anyone. Title 13 is the name of that confidentiality law, and it has been upheld by the Supreme Court. It's stronger than a presidential executive order. We really want people to feel secure in the census and that the data is well respected. And that's typically a pretty bipartisan thing, that this data is important and secure. This year it looks a little different, but we still, like, those laws are still super strong. And there's a lot of advocacy that we need to do before 2030 to make this survey better, have a better sex question, have a better, more options for household composition. There's a lot of ways that we can make this reflect our country better. All right, I'm gonna pause there and see if there's any questions or anything that has come up in the chat or anything. But if you have any questions, I would love to hear them. And if not, I will keep plowing ahead.
One question that I've heard often from families especially is that they assumed the census deadline was over, that they had received their mail, that it said it needed to be turned in, and they are wondering, they had seen that there was like a penalty if they didn't. So what is the typical response to a question like that? Or how?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That is something that can, because the census refers to April 1st as like the day where you want people to say where they were on one specific day, and that's April 1st. So a lot of people think that April 1st is the deadline. It's not a deadline, it's just like a reference date. So the census is not over yet. It is open until September 30th. If you have not responded, do it now. If you're not sure, do it again. When in doubt, count. That's our like blanket rule for folks. And it is required by law that you do the census. There is a penalty if you don't. That has never, as far as I know, or any of the people I work with in this census world, none of us have ever heard of that actually being enforced at all. It's like $100 fine, I believe. So while it, like, you know, saying that you have to do it and it's illegal not to do it might help encourage some people to get it done, but it might not. The only census like penalties that we really know that have been actively enforced are when Census Bureau officials break Title 13. They actually do go to jail and get fined huge amounts of money. So that enforcement is very active and happens, but the enforcement for people like you and me who might just not want to participate isn't super strong.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool, so we'll talk about what's happening federally and locally for a minute here. Oops. There we go. So here's the adjusted timeline. You can just see there's different operations on the left, the original dates that are the pre-COVID dates for when all of that was supposed to happen, and then the replan dates. And you can see the two little footnotes at the bottom reflect that there was another plan that let them keep counting until October 30th. And this is like their third version of the plan that went from the deadline of July 30th to then October 31st, and now we're at September 30th. So the timeline has been all over the place. It is keeping us on our toes. There's a lot of pivoting, but the overall goal of just making sure that everyone is counted once and counted correctly stays the same. And there has been a ton of press about the census recently. If anybody, like I just adore Hansilo Wang from NPR. If anyone wants to know everything about the census, follow him on Twitter, check out his articles on NPR. He is so on it. I have sent him stuff, he's amazing. And he's keeping a really close watch on this. So you can see there is a lot of concern that this could be the least accurate census ever. Which of course means that our entire democracy is being built on bad data. So it's hugely problematic, but there is still reason for hope, and we will get to that. So in Washington, we are actually doing phenomenal, all things considered. Our self-response rate is 71.2% as of the end of last week. And then when you add in the door knocking operation, the non-response follow-up, the Census Bureau says that they have counted 92.1% of Washington. And that means that we are tied for second in the nation. And we are tied for second in the nation on our self-response rate at 71.2%. And while that is great and super important to celebrate, because there's been a lot of work that has gone into getting that number so high, and for context, we were 21st in 2010. So Washington is doing like amazing this year. But our job isn't done until everybody is counted and counted correctly, and ideally are able to count themselves so that they can identify how they want their data to look. So we're encouraged by all of that. And we're also realize that it means our job isn't done yet. We still have 4 weeks going. This map here is, from our campaign website, which is WeCountWashington.org. We have a data team that uploads this and makes this all pretty for us. You can check out the map on that website if you want to like look at all of the different characteristics of that tract. But basically, the darker the orange, it means the lower the self-response. The darker the blue, the higher the self-response. So you can see like Seattle and King County were doing awesome. The more populated parts of the state are doing much, much better. And then the more rural areas are lagging a little bit farther behind. Part of that is because they're vacant units or people's second homes. So it doesn't necessarily reflect that people aren't being counted, but again, the Bureau cares about households. So that data will look better as they clean their address file. But for now, this is what our state is looking like in terms of our self-response. And then to respond to all of these barriers and all of these concerns that, that people have, there have been a ton of lawsuits from states, from counties, from cities, from local and federal advocacy groups. The National Urban League has a huge lawsuit that's going right now that a bunch of municipalities have signed on to, including King County. And that lawsuit is being fast-tracked to the Supreme Court. There have been a ton of congressional and inspector general oversight into why these decisions were made and if they were made for any political reasons and not for the integrity of the data. As soon as the shortened timeline was announced, a bunch of red flags went up for folks. And so the philanthropy community actually put together a letter and had over 900 philanthropy leaders sign, including United Way of King County. And then our campaign that we're helping lead, the We Can't Washington campaign, we also did a letter that had about 100 community leaders from Washington State specifically that signed on to that, again, including United Way. And Gordon, our CEO, was quoted in the press release for that letter. So we have been super active in this. And then there's, like I said, a lot of media attention. And in Washington, it's been bipartisan media attention, and it's been happening in Eastern and Western Washington. From that map, you can see that a lot of the more conservative areas are the ones that are really undercounted. So it really serves everybody for us to have more time with this census and to make sure it's done well. And then there is also our We Can't Washington campaign. We are doing an upcoming day of action on September 16th. So lots of energy, lots of stuff still happening. There is a slight possibility that these lawsuits and this oversight might lead to the deadline being extended back to the end of October for the census, which would be amazing. It's not super likely, but it is like a little glimmer of hope that we're clinging to right now. Oops. And then Nadia is going to talk more about the volunteer opportunity, but I just want to frame a couple of things really quick, and then I'll turn it over and see if there's any other questions. We're going to be asking you all to help with outreach. And just to remember that we are down to the hardest 10% of our community to contact. So thinking about like, who are the people in your community that need encouragement to complete the census, and how could they be reached, and who are the right people to message to them? Like, I'm thinking in my family, it's my brother. My brother is a single dad. He's working class, works way too many hours, lives rural, and doesn't have internet. So like, how is anyone going to reach my brother and convince him that this is important to do? But if we could think of a message that would reach him and people like him, then that could be really powerful and really successful. And positive peer pressure really does work in this. So just thinking about like, where you can use your influence, where are you connected to, where can you put little blurbs into newsletters? Can you hang something in the lobby of your apartment building? Just thinking, where are people now? People are in their homes a lot, so it's hard to reach them, but people are still going to grocery stores, maybe to the post office. Like, where are people naturally congregating, and how can we reach them where they are? I think places of worship could be really powerful. The whole origin story of the Christian faith starts with the census. That's why Mary and Joseph had to travel and sleep in a stable. It all started with the census. So there's really obvious tie-ins that you can make there too. But just really excited to have you all. Thank you for listening to me talk about the census. I could talk about it all day, every day, and I do. But if there are any questions or any thoughts, I would love to hear them. And if not, I'll turn it back over to Nadia.
Thanks so much, Michaela. And folks, again, feel free to use the chat box, raise your hand, we'll take questions throughout. I wanted to just show everyone kind of one more slide about the volunteer opportunity for this. And so, like Michaela said so well, it's outreach, outreach, outreach. So later tonight, you'll get an email from me, which will have a volunteer informational packet. And in that packet, you'll find some highlights of the information Michaela just shared. And you are welcome to pull from that language, from that information, for as you start your outreach initiatives within your community. And there are two main ways that we're kind of focusing on outreach. So one is creating a social media and/or digital campaign. So in your volunteer packet, you'll have some tips and tricks on how to start that, on some examples, and that can look so many different ways. So like sending emails, maybe it's text messages, maybe it's using a social media platform to be able to get the word out. And we're hoping that this is something that you can kind of find your own rhythm, your own cadence for how often you want to talk about it, but really, you know, knowing that we're in these last 3 to 4 weeks, that you're just pushing that out as often as you feel comfortable. And then the other option is neighborhood outreach. So promoting the census on foot in your neighborhood or communities that you may work and play in, that you have connection and relationship to. And for this piece, we have available for you flyers and outreach materials. And we'll have like a curbside or like lobby pickup at our office. And in your volunteer packet, there will be listed some windows for different dates that you can stop by our office and pick up your outreach packet and be able to spread the word that way as well. So we really wanted to provide different opportunities. You know your community, your network best. Whatever is going to help us really get folks counted. We want to be able to provide meaningful and helpful resources for you to get that information out. And so hopefully it can either happen in a virtual way or a physical or like in-person way. And so that's why we have these 2 different outreach packets for you to consult and then figure out what's going to be the best way. And for this monthly challenge, we're hoping to activate 40 Emerging Leader 365. So if you have friends in your network that you could also rally, also help us build this critical mass of folks doing outreach, people are welcome to sign up for this opportunity throughout the rest of this month. They'll be able, as I said earlier, to view this recording and then connect with Michaela and myself to set up either their digital campaign or their neighborhood outreach. So beyond just asking folks to make sure they complete the census, if again there are others, friends, family members, folks in your network that you think could get really excited, energized about doing outreach, they can sign up for this monthly challenge at any point over the next few weeks to help us be able to get the word out. Do we have any questions before I hand it off to Drew to wrap us up? Okay, with that, Drew, feel free to cue me. I'll hit for the next slide and you can take it away.
Cool, thank you, Nadia. So I just wanted to give a little background on the Emerging Leaders 365 program. I work with donors to this program along with some other folks at United Way, like Nadia, who helps us with all of our volunteer stuff and comes up with all of these fun ideas. So Emerging Leaders 365, some of your names look a little familiar, so you might know this already. But Emerging Leaders 365 is a group of donors to United Way who are young professionals, excuse me, and want to get involved in the community to connect with other caring and passionate people through volunteer projects like this, attending events either virtually or in person most of the time, and being able to learn about community issues like the census and like all of the other programs we have at United Way. And you can become a donor in 3 different ways by making a one-time gift of $365 or $1 a day, giving $30 a month, or fundraising $365 or more with a fundraising campaign that you set up online. The fundraiser can be a really fun way to also engage your networks while you're doing this work. And it can be really cool to see, you know, people supporting our programs in the community to ensure that people have homes, students graduate, and families are financially stable. So you can continue your impact with this project by joining Emerging Leaders 365. And there are also, on the next slide, Nadia, a couple of upcoming events that we have this month. One of them is virtual on September 16th in about 2 weeks. And then we also have community cocktails at 2 different local restaurants. And those are $30 tickets, and you can bring someone if you'd like. You'll be seated at a table outside, away from everyone else there, 6 feet distance, and so it will be safe. And to learn about some different community issues and work that United Way is doing. So if you're interested in any of those opportunities, I'm putting some links in the chat for our event calendar, our donation page, and then also my email if you have more questions about becoming a donor or getting more involved with Emerging Leaders 365. And with that, I don't know if Michaela or Nadia have anything else or if there are any questions. But I do want to say thank you all for joining us tonight and for making some moves to help improve our community and do some really good work. So thank you. And Nadia, do you have anything else, or Michaela?
Yeah, I think I'm all set. Michaela, are you okay?
Yeah, nothing else from me, but there is that day of action on September 16th. So if you want to time any of your outreach around that day, you are more than welcome to. But that's all from me.
Great, and I will put in the chat box for folks as well information. It's part of our, as Michaela mentioned, part of our Days of Caring for that September 16 date. You can sign up via email to get action alerts for that event. And that'll be another great way to come together with like-minded community members to talk more about the census and other ways in which you can make impact and help us reach our goal. So I will put that there as well. But again, just to echo Drew's closing comments, thank you all so much for coming and joining us this evening. And I'm really excited to have you all get out there and promote the census. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you guys.